Good morning. I'm Brandon, alcoholic and addict in recovery. Today I'm continuing to read from The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer and looking at chapter 4 in The Untethered Soul this morning. And so really in this chapter we're starting to examine the reality of consciousness and the conscious experience. And very few of us go to school where we discuss the nature of consciousness or the reality of our conscious experience. That subject matter is often left to more spiritual organizations, religion, things like that, and our parents to teach us, or for us to just learn on our own. So even though conscious experience of the world is arguably the single most important aspect of our lives, it's something that most of us go through life without having a lot of significant discussion about. So we're going to talk about it some today and how it relates to alcoholism and addiction and recovery. So reading from the book on page 32, Singer says, "The best way to learn about consciousness is through your own direct experience. For example, you know very well that your consciousness can be aware of a wide field of objects, or it can also be focused on one object that you are aware of. It can also be so focused on one object that you are unaware of anything else. This is what happens when you get lost in thought. You can be reading and then suddenly you're not reading anymore. It happens all the time. So think about that. You're reading something and then all of a sudden you realize, man, I haven't been paying attention the last paragraph. You read that last paragraph. Your mind looked at each word and it read each word, but you weren't paying attention to it. Your conscious experience was elsewhere. You can be reading and then suddenly you're not reading anymore. It happens all the time. You just start thinking about something else. Outside objects or mental thoughts can catch your attention at any time, but it's still the same awareness whether it's focused on the outside or on your thoughts." So when I read this, I was immediately reminded of recovering addicts and alcoholics who have experienced a recurrence of drug or alcohol use. And I've heard people say before, I don't know what happened. One minute I was fine, and the next minute I was sitting in the liquor store parking lot with a bottle. And when I first heard someone tell me that story, it sounded like BS. I mean, to me, I kind of didn't understand, well, how could you 1 minute be okay, and then the next minute you're drinking again? Like, how does that happen? But what if I keep an open mind here, and what if these folks just momentarily lost focus of their conscious experience? And much like someone who's reading words but not actually reading them or aware of them, what if their conscious mind wandered just long enough off the path of recovery to let their physical body wander back into the liquor store? So that raised the question for me, would they have better success in the future if they were more secure in their own seat of consciousness? So let's read the next part of this chapter and see what he has to say. "The key is that consciousness has the ability to concentrate on different things. The subject, consciousness, has the ability to selectively focus on its awareness on specific objects. If you step back, you will clearly see that objects are constantly passing before you at all three levels: mental, emotional, and physical. When you're not centered, your consciousness invariably gets attracted toward one or more of those objects and focuses on them. So when you're not centered, then all of a sudden your consciousness can drift." That's the idea of reading something without being aware of what you're reading. Or it could be the idea of being in recovery, but all of a sudden your consciousness starts to drift back toward the drugs and the alcohol. If it concentrates enough, your sense of awareness loses itself in the object. It is no longer aware that it is aware of the object. It just becomes object conscious. So no longer are you recognizing that you're thinking about drinking or using drugs. You're just doing it. You're not, so, right now, if I thought about using or drinking, I would be aware, oh, I'm thinking, I'm having these thoughts. I need to call somebody. But what if you aren't aware of that at that level? What if you are just in those thoughts? That presents a different kind of situation for people, and maybe that's what I was missing when I had a hard time understanding how people could experience being fine 1 minute and getting drunk again the next minute. It is no longer aware that that it is aware of the object. It just becomes object conscious. Have you ever noticed that when you're deeply absorbed in watching TV, you have no awareness of where you're sitting or what else is going on in the room? So substitute TV for drugs and alcohol, and it starts to become a little clearer why some people find themselves returning to drug and alcohol use without even truly being aware of what's happening. For many of us, a state of true awareness about what we're doing is so rare and fleeting in life that it doesn't occur enough to prevent us from letting our typical emotional and thought patterns take over. So before I look at the next part, I got to take a quick commercial break just for a second to say, if you like this video or any of the daily videos I make, do me a big favor, hit the thumbs up button down below and the subscribe button as well. And if you want to get notified whenever I post a new video, which I do every day, then hit the little bell that you see down there. So moving on, reading a little bit more about this. When you concentrate on the world of the physical senses, it draws you in. Then your emotional and mental reactions draw you in further. At that point, you are no longer sitting in the centered self. You are absorbed in the inner show you're watching. Let's look at your inner show. You have an underlying pattern of thoughts that goes on all around you all the time. This pattern of thought stays pretty much the same. You are as familiar and comfortable with your normal thought patterns as you are with the living space of your home. You also have emotions that are your norm, a certain amount of fear, a certain amount of love, a certain amount of insecurity. You know that if certain things happen, one or more of these emotions will flare up and dominate your awareness. Then eventually they will settle back down to the norm. You know this so well that you are very busy inside making sure nothing happens to create these disturbances. In fact, you are so preoccupied with controlling your world of thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations that you don't even know you're in there. That is the normal state for most people. When you are in this lost state, you get so totally absorbed in the objects of thoughts, feelings, and the senses that you forget the subject. You forget yourself, and you become very absorbed in there, and that's when it's easy to just allow yourself to become your thoughts, emotions. And that, I think, is why, as I read this, I started to better understand people who find themselves in situations where they're drinking or using again when they consciously did not want to be doing that. That is not something they had any interest in doing, and yet they found themselves in the liquor store buying liquor. That makes a lot more sense to me after having read this. So it seems like the concept of awareness is important for everyone, but perhaps doubly so for alcoholics and addicts in recovery. Conscious awareness allows us to observe our thoughts and emotions in a more objective manner, rather than allowing ourselves to be led around by them. So this is a lot to swallow. So I'm going to stop right there for today, and tomorrow I'm going to come back with a big bombshell that happens later in this chapter, and really look at the answer to the question, who am I? And it's going to be important not just for everybody, but especially the alcoholic and addict, because I think once we can strip away all of the things we thought we were, figure out what we really are, it gives us a good place to start rebuilding our lives in recovery. Have a great day. I'll see you back here with more tomorrow.